At the restaurant where my daughter had invited half the town to watch me make a fool of myself, a tired woman in a faded janitor's uniform stood beside my table and whispered, "I'm sorry, I wore my work uniform," while my own family laughed loud enough for every fork in the room to stop moving. I looked at her name patch. Ruth, her shoes were wet from mopping floors somewhere before she came. Her hands were red and cracked from cleaning chemicals. A small silver lunch pail hung from her wrist, the kind factory workers used to carry years ago. My daughter, Marcy, had set the whole thing up like a joke. A blind date for her 70-year-old father with a woman she thought was beneath us. She wanted me embarrassed. She wanted Ruth humiliated. And she wanted the whole room to believe I was too lonely and too old to know the difference between kindness and pity. But when Ruth lowered her eyes and reached for the chair like she might run, I stood up, pulled it out for her, and said, "I still want this date." That was when my son-in-law's smile disappeared. I did not know it yet, but that little silver lunch pail Ruth carried was the first crack in a lie my family had been building for almost 3 years. I did not know that inside it was a folded church bulletin, a torn receipt from a storage locker, and a photograph of my late wife I had never seen before. And I surely did not know that by the following Friday, my own daughter would sit in a county hearing room and accuse me of being mentally unfit to manage my own life. My name is Walter Bell. Most folks in Larkspur, Ohio, still call me Walt. I am 70 years old, and for 38 of those years, I worked as a postal inspector. That means I spent my life following paper trails, missing packages, forged signatures, money orders, stolen checks, and lies people thought were safely sealed inside envelopes. I was never a rich man, but I knew how to read a mark on paper. I knew how to tell when a signature was traced. I knew how to notice when someone had opened something, steamed it, taped it, and pretended it had arrived that way. That skill helped me put strangers in prison. I never thought I would use it on my own child. If you've ever been made to feel small by your own family, stay with me, because what happened next changed everything I believed about love, blood, and justice. My wife, Helen, died 4 years before that restaurant night. She had been the warm part of our house. I was quiet, she was light. I fixed gutters, balanced checkbooks, and read the paper with my coffee. Helen remembered birthdays, made soup for sick neighbors, and kept a little notebook of people's favorite pies. She also kept secrets, though I did not know how many. Our only child, Marcy, was 42 that year. When she was little, she used to climb into my lap and fall asleep against my work shirt while I sorted mail route maps at the kitchen table. I carried her on my shoulders at county fairs. I sat through dance recitals where she forgot every step and still clapped like she had won a gold medal. Then she grew up. That is not a complaint. Children are supposed to grow up, but some grow away from love and toward appetite. Marcy married Trent Holloway, a man with clean fingernails, expensive watches, and a way of smiling that never reached his eyes. He ran a financial planning office downtown, with glass doors and coffee machines that made foam. He used words like legacy, asset flow, and wealth protection. But I never saw him protect anything that did not benefit him first. Together they had a little boy named Eli. Ellie was 9 when this story happened. Thin shoulders, brown hair that always stuck up in back, and a habit of drawing tiny houses with yellow windows. He loved maps, old stamps, and sitting beside me while I showed him the difference between a postmark and a cancellation stamp. Helen adored him. Before she died, she made me promise one thing. "Walt," she said from the hospital bed, her voice thin as tissue, "if that boy ever feels unwanted, you make room." I told her. Always. She smiled like that was all she needed to hear. After Helen passed, Marcy and Trent started visiting less. When they did come, they walked through my house like appraisers. Trent would pause at the walnut cabinet and say, "This is probably worth something." Marcy would open Helen's china closet without asking and say, "Mom would have wanted me to have these eventually." Eventually, that word became a shovel in her hand. I tried not to see the change at first. Grief makes you generous with excuses. I told myself Marcy was stressed. Trent was ambitious. They were raising a child. Life was expensive. Everybody gets sharp around money sometimes. But Eli noticed before I did. One Saturday afternoon, he came over while Marcy and Trent attended some charity brunch. He sat at my kitchen table with crayons and drew a small blue house, then a big gray building beside it. "What's that one?" I asked. "That's where Mom says you might live soon," he said. I felt something cold move through my chest. Did she now? He nodded, still coloring. She said old people need places with nurses so they don't forget the stove. I haven't forgotten the stove yet. I know. He looked up at me, but she said you don't know you forget. That was the first time I heard the shape of their plan. A month later, Marcy started calling more often. Not warm calls, management calls. She asked whether I had paid the property tax, whether I had left the garage door open, whether I had taken my blood pressure medicine, even though I had no blood pressure medicine. She sent me brochures for senior living communities with smiling gray-haired couples eating salad. Then she told people I was slipping. At church, Mrs. Donner patted my arm and said, "We're praying for your confusion, Walt." At the grocery store, a man from Rotary asked if I had found my way home all right. I laughed it off. Quiet men often do. We think silence is dignity. Sometimes it is just a door we let other people lock from the outside. The blind date was Marcy's idea. She said I needed companionship. "Dad," she told me over the phone, "you sit in that house like a ghost, Trent and I worry." "I'm all right." "No. You say that because you don't understand how isolated you are." There it was again, that soft little knife. "You don't understand." She told me she had a friend from a local volunteer group, a widow. "Sweet, simple, age-appropriate," she said, like she was placing a shelter dog. I almost said no, but something in me was tired of proving I was alive by staying alone. So I agreed. The restaurant was called the Copper Finch. It had dark wood, white tablecloths, and a hostess who knew Trent by name. When I arrived, I saw Marcy and Trent seated near the bar, with two other couples from Trent's office. That surprised me. I thought the date was private. Marcy waved too brightly. "Dad, we just wanted to make sure you were comfortable." I should have left right then. Instead, I sat at a small table near the center of the room. I wore my gray suit, the one Helen bought me for our 40th anniversary. In my breast pocket, I had tucked the old linen handkerchief she embroidered with my initials. I do not know why. Maybe because first dates after 50 years of marriage feel less like beginnings and more like betrayals, unless you bring the dead with you gently. At 6:17, Ruth came in. She was not dressed for the Copper Finch. She wore navy work pants, a gray uniform shirt, and a pale blue jacket with the words Mercy Grove Medical Center Environmental Services stitched on the sleeve. Her hair was silver blonde, pinned back badly as if she had done it in a hurry. She looked around, saw the room, saw Marcy watching and froze. "Behind me," Trent chuckled. Marcy whispered, loud enough to carry, "Oh my God, she actually came like that." Ruth heard it. Of course she did. Cruel people always pretend their whispers are accidents. Ruth walked toward me with careful steps. Her face was tired but kind. She held that silver lunch pail tight, like it was the only thing in the room that belonged to her. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wore my work uniform. My shift ran late, and I didn't want to stand you up." That should have been the moment everyone remembered their manners. Instead, Trent raised his glass toward his friends and said, "Well, Walt always did appreciate practical women." Laughter. Not loud at first. Then loud enough, Ruth's cheeks went red. Marcy leaned back with that satisfied look daughters should never wear while hurting their fathers. I stood. The room got quiet in that hungry way rooms do when they sense a scene. I pulled out Ruth's chair. "I still want this date," I said. Ruth looked at me like she had been bracing for a slap and received a blanket instead. She sat. I sat. Marcy's smile thinned. For the first few minutes, Ruth barely spoke. She kept apologizing for things that did not need apologies. Her uniform, her late arrival, her hands, the lunch pail which she tucked under the chair. I asked her what kind of work she did at Mercy Grove. "Cleaning mostly," she said. "Patient rooms, surgery floors some nights, old records wing when they need help." "Honest work," I said. Her eyes softened. "My late husband used to say no floor stays clean unless somebody bends down." I liked her immediately. Not romantically at first. That is not how older hearts work. At our age, fondness arrives wearing work boots. It checks whether the chair is sturdy. It asks whether you have eaten. It does not burst through the door with roses. It sits down quietly and tells the truth. Ruth told me she had been widowed 7 years. No children. A sister in Dayton she did not speak to much. She worked evenings because the hospital paid a little more. Then she asked about Helen. Most people avoided Helen's name around me, as if saying it might break a glass. Ruth said it gently, like she understood that dead wives still take up chairs. I told her Helen grew tomatoes that split in August heat. I told her she hummed hymns while balancing the checkbook. I told her she believed every child should have one adult who answered the phone no matter what. Ruth listened. Across the room, Marcy stopped laughing. Halfway through dinner, Ruth excused herself to wash her hands. When she stood, her lunch pail tipped under the chair. The latch popped open, and a few things slid onto the floor: a napkin, a hospital badge, a folded church bulletin, and a small photograph. I bent to help gather them. The photograph landed face up by my shoe. My breath stopped. It was Helen. Not old Helen. Not hospital bed Helen. This was Helen maybe 6 months before she died, standing outside Mercy Grove Medical Center, beside a woman in a cleaning uniform. Beside Ruth, on the back, written in Helen's handwriting, were 5 words: "If Walt comes alone, help." I stared at those words until the restaurant noise turned to water. Ruth returned and saw the photograph in my hand. Her face changed. She reached for it quickly, not rudely but with fear. "Where did you get this?" I asked. She swallowed. "Your wife gave it to me." "When?" "A few weeks before she passed." I looked across the restaurant. Marcy was watching us now, not smug anymore. Alert. "What did Helen need help with?" I asked. Ruth sat slowly, her hands folded around the photograph. "I promised her I wouldn't say unless you asked." "My wife has been dead 4 years," I said. "I'm asking." Ruth's eyes moved toward Marcy and Trent. "Not here," she whispered. That was the first moment I understood the blind date was not the joke my daughter thought it was. It was an accident. Or maybe, in the strange way life works when the dead still have unfinished business, it was an appointment. After dinner, Marcy rushed to my side before Ruth and I could leave. "Well," she said, too brightly, "that was certainly memorable." Trent stood beside her. "Ruth, was it? Good of you to come straight from work. Very authentic." Ruth lowered her chin. I said, "Trent." He looked at me. "If you speak down to her again, this date will be the least memorable thing that happens tonight." I did not raise my voice. I never had to in my line of work. A quiet sentence placed correctly can carry more weight than shouting. Marcy's eyes flashed. "Dad, don't be dramatic. We're just teasing." "No," I said. "You're testing how much cruelty you can call concern." Her mouth opened. I turned to Ruth. "May I walk you to your car?" Outside, the air smelled like rain and hot asphalt. Ruth's car was an old green Subaru with one rusted door and a rosary hanging from the mirror. She stood beside it, holding the lunch pail against her coat. "I shouldn't have come," she said. "I'm glad you did. She told me you knew." "Who?" "Your daughter. She said, you wanted to meet someone ordinary, someone who wouldn't expect much." That hit harder than I let show. Ruth looked ashamed, as if she had done wrong by believing it. "Mrs. Bell came to the hospital records wing sometimes," she said. "Not as a patient. She was looking for someone, or something. I didn't ask at first. She was kind to me. Brought me banana bread once. Then one night she got dizzy in the hallway, and I helped her sit down. That was when she told me her family was changing around her." "What family?" Ruth looked toward the restaurant windows. Marcy and Trent were still inside. Trent was on his phone. "She said if anything happened to her, and if you ever seemed alone, I should give you something." "What something?" Ruth opened the lunch pail. Inside was the folded church bulletin, the photo, a wrapped peppermint, and a small brass key taped beneath the lid. "I didn't know how to reach you," she said. "Then your daughter called me last week." "Marcy called you?" "Yes. She said she found my name in her mother's old volunteer notes. She asked if I'd do a kindness and meet you. But the way she said it," Ruth paused. "It felt mean. I almost refused. Then I remembered Helen's photograph. I looked at the brass key. What does it open?" "I don't know. Helen said, if Walt is ever made to feel like a burden, give him the key and tell him to check the blue drawer." "The blue drawer?" Ruth nodded. "That's all." Helen had painted only one drawer blue in our house. It was in her sewing table, a little thing in the sunroom where she kept thread, buttons, and scraps of fabric. I had not opened it since she died. I drove home that night with the key in my pocket and my hands tight on the wheel. Behind me, Marcy called 6 times. I did not answer. When I stepped into my house, the silence felt different. Not empty, waiting. Helen's sewing table sat in the sunroom by the window. Dust lay soft on the top. Her tomato plants used to start there in March, little green promises in paper cups. I pulled the blue drawer. It stuck. I had to work it gently, side to side, until it opened. Inside were spools of thread, a packet of needles, old buttons in a baby food jar, and a folded piece of oilcloth taped to the underside. My name was written on it, Walt. Inside the oilcloth was a small envelope. Not a will, not a deed, not anything dramatic at first glance. A receipt. Larkspur, self-storage, Unit 18C, paid 1 year in advance. The date was 6 weeks before Helen died. There was also a note in Helen's handwriting. My steady man, if you are reading this, then I was right to worry. Please do not blame yourself. I saw things you were too loyal to see. Marcy is my daughter, and I love her. But love does not mean handing a knife to someone just because they share your blood. Ask for Mara Vale. She knows what I placed there. Protect Eli. I sat down hard in Helen's chair. Protect Eli, not protect the house, not protect the bank account, not protect my name, protect Eli. By then, it was nearly midnight. Rain tapped the sunroom windows. I held that note under the lamp and read it again and again until the words stopped being handwriting and became Helen's voice. I had missed something, maybe a lot of things. The next morning, Marcy arrived before 9 without calling. Trent was with her. He wore a navy coat and the annoyed look of a man who had expected obedience and found a locked door. I opened it but did not invite them in. Marcy held up her phone. Dad, you scared me last night. Not answering calls is not acceptable. I was tired. You were rude. I was quiet. Trent smiled. Walt, nobody's attacking you. We just need to talk about what happened. You seemed agitated. There it was. The new word, agitated. Marcy stepped closer. You threatened Trent in public. I corrected him. You embarrassed me. I almost laughed. But Eli was standing behind them by the car holding his backpack, eyes down. Why is Eli here? I asked. Marcy sighed. His school has some teacher conference thing. We're busy. He can sit with you a few hours. Assuming you're feeling stable. Ellie flinched at that word, stable. I looked at my grandson, and whatever anger I had settled into something colder. He can stay, I said. Marcy pushed past me into the hall, looking around as if checking for hazards. Trent followed. Dad, she said, we need to discuss your behavior. Trent and I have been patient, but last night confirmed concerns. What concerns? Trent opened a leather folder. Memory decline, social judgment, possible vulnerability to manipulation. He glanced toward the sunroom, where Ruth's lunch pail sat on the table. My body went still. You brought a folder to my house. Preparedness is not hostility, he said. Marcy softened her voice, which meant she was about to lie. We love you. We're worried someone might take advantage of you. Someone like a hospital janitor, I asked. She's environmental staff, Marcy said. And you don't know her. Neither did you. Marcy blinked. I watched her closely. Old habit. People reveal more in the half-second after a question than in the answer. Trent stepped in. The point is, we think it's time to put safeguards in place. A financial power of attorney, medical decision authority. Nothing drastic. Nothing drastic for who? For you, Marcy said. So you can relax. Ellie stood in the doorway, small and silent. I looked at him. Go put your backpack in the kitchen, buddy. There are cookies in the tin. He obeyed quickly. When he was gone, I said, you will not discuss taking over my life in front of my grandson again. Marcy's face hardened. He needs to understand reality. No, I said. He needs adults who don't use fear as furniture. Trent closed his folder. You're proving our point. I leaned in slightly. Then write that down too. They left 10 minutes later, angry but controlled. Before leaving, Marcy hugged Eli too tightly and whispered something in his ear. He nodded, but his face looked pale. After they drove off, I found him in the kitchen, staring at the cookie tin without opening it. You all right? I asked. He shook his head. What did your mom say? His lower lip trembled. She said if I talk too much here, you'll get in trouble. I knelt slowly, my knees cracking. What kind of trouble? She said they might make you go away. Something in me broke cleanly then. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet break like ice under snow. Ellie, I said, look at me. He did. You are never responsible for grown-up lies. His eyes filled. Am I a lie? I could barely breathe. No, buddy. You are the truest thing in this family, he cried then. Not loud. Eli never cried loud. He folded inward, like he was apologizing for taking up space. By sunset, I knew this was not about Ruth or a date or embarrassment. It was not even about my house. My daughter and her husband were building a case that I was unfit. And somehow, Helen had seen it coming before any of us. That afternoon, I called Larkspur Self-Storage. Unit 18C was still active, paid in cash every January, by whom the clerk would not say over the phone. I drove there with Helen's brass key in my pocket and Eli beside me, because he begged not to go home yet. The storage place sat behind a closed bowling alley, rows of orange doors under gray sky. The manager, a broad woman with short black hair, came out when she saw me. Walter Bell? She asked. Yes, I'm Mara Vale. Helen's note had named her. Mara looked at Eli, then at me. I wondered when you'd come. You knew my wife? She helped my mother after a stroke, brought food, sat with her. Helen was good people. Mara's eyes moved over my face. She said you might arrive with questions and a broken heart. I could not answer. Mara walked us to Unit 18C. The key turned with a stiff little click. Inside was not furniture, not boxes of money, not some dramatic treasure. It was a filing cabinet. One gray metal cabinet, 4 drawers. On top of it sat a small wooden bird Eli had carved with Helen during one summer visit. I remembered him painting it yellow at our kitchen table. I remembered Marcy saying it looked messy and telling him not to get paint on his shirt. Eli walked to it slowly. "Grandma kept this," he whispered. "She kept almost everything you made," I said. Mara handed me a sealed envelope from the top drawer. "Helen asked me to keep this separate." Inside was a flash drive, a notarized letter, and a list of names. Agan, not a will. Something stranger, the notarized letter was signed by Helen and witnessed by Mara and a local notary named June Pelham. It said that Helen had reason to believe Marcy Holloway and Trent Holloway were attempting to isolate Walter Bell, misrepresent his mental state, and gain control of his finances and property. It said Helen had collected supporting records. It said her primary fear was not for herself but for Eli Holloway, who had disclosed repeated emotional intimidation inside his home. My hands shook when I read that. Ellie stood beside me, holding the wooden bird. "Grandpa?" he said. "What's intimidation?" Mara looked away. I folded the paper. "It means making somebody scared so they do what you want." He looked down. "Oh. One word, oh. Sometimes a child does not need to explain the whole house. One word opens every door." I took the first drawer home that day in a banker's box. I did not open all of it at once. Evidence must be handled with respect. Even personal evidence. Especially personal evidence. That evening, after Eli went home, Ruth came by with soup. She stood on my porch in a clean sweater, nervous, holding the pot like a peace offering. "I don't want to intrude," she said. "You're not." We sat at my kitchen table while rain tapped the windows again. I showed her Helen's note. Ruth cried silently when she saw the handwriting. She was scared, Ruth said. Of Marcy, of Trent mostly. But she said Marcy became different around him, like she was always trying to earn a place beside him. Ruth told me Helen had come to Mercy Grove because Trent had once told a dinner guest that he had connections who could document cognitive decline if needed. Helen did not understand how, but she started paying attention. She learned Ruth cleaned the old records wing where retired hospital administrative files were stored before off-site scanning. One night, Helen asked Ruth whether Mercy Grove had records of a child counseling referral from several years back. "Ellie?" I asked. Ruth nodded. He was seen by a school counselor after a panic episode in 2nd grade. Helen wanted to know if records existed because Marcy denied it ever happened. "And you helped her." I told her where to request them legally. "I didn't steal anything." Helen was careful. She said truth collected wrong becomes another lie. That sounded like Helen. We opened the flash drive on my old desktop computer. The first file was an audio recording. Helen's voice filled the kitchen. "Walt, if you found this, I am sorry I could not make you see it while I was there. You always believed the best about Marcy because you loved the little girl she was. I loved her too, but she has learned to turn shame into control. Trent is worse. He has debts. More than they admit. He has been pressing her to get access to our house, our savings, and the account we set aside for Eli. Do not confront them alone. Do not sign anything. Find attorney Leona Briggs. She has copies of the protection file." And Walt. Helen paused in the recording. I heard her breathe. "If they try to make you feel old, remember this. A tree is not weak because it has rings. It is proof it survived weather." I covered my face. Ruth placed her hand near mine, not on it. "Just near enough," Helen continued. "The lunch pail matters. Ruth has it. I gave her the first key because no one in our family would ever think to respect what she carries." The room went very still. Ruth whispered, "I didn't know that part." Helen said, "Inside the pail lining is a second pocket. I stitched it myself after Ruth's broke. If Ruth still has it, look there." Ruth turned the silver lunch pail over on the table. It was old, scratched, with a faded sticker of a sparrow on one side. She ran her fingers along the inside seam. "There's no pocket," she said. "Let me see." I said postal inspectors learn seams, tape seams, envelope seams, package seams. Lies have edges. The lining looked ordinary. But near the back corner I saw a thread slightly darker than the rest. I used my pocket knife to lift it. A hidden flap opened. Inside was a folded sheet of wax paper. In it were 3 things: a tiny memory card, a bank deposit slip, and a child's drawing of a yellow bird in a cage. On the back, in Eli's uneven 2nd grade handwriting, were the words. Grandma says birds need doors too. Ruth pressed her hand to her mouth. I stared at the drawing. That was the night I stopped thinking of myself as a lonely widower being pushed around by his daughter. I became what I had been for 38 years, an investigator. Only this time, the case file was my family. The next morning, I called attorney Leona Briggs. She was 81 years old, sharp-voiced, and still practicing law out of a small office behind the courthouse because, as she told me, retirement is where useful people go to be interrupted by hobbies. When I said Helen Bell's name, she went silent. Then she said, "Come at 2, bring nothing you don't want copied." Leona's office smelled like coffee, dust, and old paper. Certificates covered one wall. A photograph of her younger self standing beside a governor sat crooked on a shelf. She read Helen's letter without expression. Then she inserted the memory card into a reader. The video opened with a view of my sunroom. Helen sat in her chair, thinner than I remembered but steady-eyed. "Leona," she said into the camera, "this is my statement for Walter, if needed." In the video, Helen described incidents I had dismissed at the time. Marcy taking my checkbook to help balance it, and returning it with 3 missing carbon copies. Trent asking Helen whether I had ever had formal cognitive testing. Marcy telling Helen that Eli had anxiety problems and should not spend too much time with old grief. Trent pressuring Helen to move our savings into one of his managed accounts. Then Helen said something that made Leona stop the video and look at me. Trent Holloway asked me directly whether Walter had signed the old Educational Trust Amendment. He should not know that trust exists. I frowned. "What educational trust?" Leona folded her hands. "Helen created a trust for Eli 6 years ago, small at first. Then she added life insurance proceeds before she died. I didn't know. She wanted to tell you when she felt safe from pressure. The trust was designed so Marcy and Trent could not touch it. Only Eli's education, housing, medical needs, and later his first home. You were named trust protector. I was what? The person with authority to remove a trustee if Eli was at risk. Who was trustee?" Leona's mouth tightened. "Originally Helen's cousin. He died 2 years ago. Successor trustee should have been me, but I never received formal notice from the bank that the role activated." I felt the floor tilt slightly. "Who has been managing it?" "That," Leona said, "is the question that concerns me." She pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Mr. Bell, has your daughter asked you to sign anything in the last 3 years?" "No." "Think carefully." I did. My 71st birthday dinner. Marcy had brought cards. Trent had brought a stack of forms, saying one was for updating emergency contacts at their house in case Eli stayed with me. I had signed a school pickup authorization. Maybe 2 pages, maybe 3. "I signed something for Eli's school," I said. Leona's eyes sharpened. "Did you read it?" Shame rose in me. "Not all of it. Do you have copies?" "No." She leaned back. "Then we start there. And before I tell you what was inside that file, let me ask you something. If your own child tried to erase everything your late wife built, would you stay quiet or would you fight?" I did not fight loudly. I fought the way old paper fights fire. By surviving long enough to be read, for the next week, I moved quietly. I requested copies of school authorization forms. I pulled property records from the county recorder. I reviewed bank notices Helen had stored. I called June Pelham, the notary, who confirmed Helen had signed several statements but also remembered notarizing something for Marcy and Trent the year after Helen died. "What document?" I asked. June hesitated. "A medical power form, I think. For you. I never appeared before you for that," she said softly. "That's why I remember. They said you were in the car, too tired to come in." I refused. Trent got angry. A week later, I heard another notary did it. "Who?" "Curtis Vale. Mara's brother." When I asked Mara, her face went pale. "Curtis lost his commission last year," she said. "Bad notarizations. He had gambling debts. Trent used him for investment clients sometimes." Another thread. I followed it. At the county recorder's office, a young clerk printed recent filings connected to my name. One document stood out, a durable power of attorney, signed by Walter Bell, notarized by Curtis Vale, granting Marcy Holloway authority over finances if I was deemed unable to manage my affairs. Attached was a 1-page letter from a physician stating I had displayed signs of cognitive instability. The physician's name was Dr. Samuel Klein. I had never met Dr. Samuel Klein. When I saw my signature on the form, my stomach tightened. It looked like mine. Almost. But the W was wrong. Too careful. My real W had an impatient hook on the second peak. This one looked drawn by someone who had practiced from birthday cards. A forged signature is not just ink. It is an insult wearing your name, I asked the clerk for certified copies. She lowered her voice. Mr. Bell, there was another filing request yesterday. For what? A petition packet. Guardianship inquiry. Not filed yet, but reserved for emergency review. By whom? She checked the screen. Marcy Holloway. The ticking clock began right there under fluorescent lights. They were not planning someday. They were moving now. Leona called it preemptive control. They would claim I was vulnerable, unstable, and being manipulated by a woman I barely knew. Ruth. They would use the restaurant scene as proof. They would say I had threatened Trent. They would present the forged power of attorney as evidence that I had already trusted Marcy before declining further. And if a judge granted emergency guardianship, Marcy could control my accounts, restrict visitors, sell assets for my care, and limit Eli's time with me. That night, Marcy came again. This time, she brought two people, Trent and a woman named Dina Price, who introduced herself as a senior transition consultant. She wore soft colors and spoke like every sentence had been trained in a seminar. "We're not here to upset you, Walter," Dina said. "Nobody who calls me Walter in my own doorway has come to comfort me." Marcy sighed. "Dad, please don't start." Dina smiled. "Your daughter is frightened. She believes you may be forming unsafe attachments." "Ruth has a name," Trent said. "You had one dinner with a woman who carries hospital trash for a living, and now you're defending her like family." I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me, so Eli, if he was in their car, would not hear. "Go home, Trent." Marcy's voice cracked, but not with sadness, with anger pretending to be pain. "You're choosing a stranger over your daughter." "No, I'm choosing decency over cruelty." Dina lifted a folder. "Mr. Bell, resistance is common in transitions." I looked at her. "How much are they paying you?" Her smile held, but her eyes changed. Marcy said, "This is exactly what Dr. Klein warned us about." "I've never met Dr. Klein, you forgot." The word landed between us. Forgot. Sharp. Useful. Trent put his hand on Marcy's shoulder. A public image touch. Husband protecting worried wife. "You need evaluation," he said. "And you need a better forger." His face changed, only for a second. But I saw it. Marcy looked confused. Trent recovered first. "You see," he said to Dina, "paranoia." I smiled then, and I think it unnerved him because it was not a happy smile. "Good night," I said. Marcy stepped forward. "Dad, if you force us to act, don't blame me for what happens." "Marcy," I said, "when this is over, I hope you remember you had chances to stop." She stared at me like she did not recognize me. Maybe she did not. For years she had known me only as the father who forgave. She had mistaken that for the father who never noticed. The next days moved like a storm forming beyond the hills. Leona filed a notice challenging the power of attorney. She requested the notary log from Curtis Vale. Mara found her brother and convinced him to speak before Trent could scare him silent. Ruth requested her work schedules from Mercy Grove to prove she had never been paid or influenced by me. I requested my own medical records and got written confirmation that I had never been examined by Dr. Klein. Then Leona found the file. Not in court records, not in bank records. In Eli's school archive, the school pickup form I had signed on my birthday had been scanned with other family documents. One page was indeed a pickup authorization. The second page was blank on the scan, except for my signature at the bottom. A signature page, separated from whatever had been attached later. I remembered Trent sliding papers toward me while Marcy cut cake. I remembered Eli sitting beside me, whispering that he had drawn a yellow bird for Grandma's birthday, even though she was in heaven. I had signed without reading, because I trusted my daughter at my own kitchen table. That blank signed page became part of a later document, the forged power of attorney. But that was not the biggest truth. The school file also contained counselor notes from when Eli was 7. The notes said Eli reported being told he was expensive, difficult, and the reason adults fight. He told the counselor his father locked the pantry because snacks are for people who earn. He said his mother cried in the bathroom and told him not to tell Grandpa because Grandpa would make trouble, and then Daddy would send him away. I read those lines in Leona's office with my hand over my mouth. Leona's voice softened for the first time. "Walt, this is no longer only financial." No, it was not. Money was the road. Eli was the destination. Helen had known. She had watched a little boy shrink inside a beautiful house while adults smiled at fundraisers. The rich villain and humble elder contrast was not just about bank accounts. Trent had the office, the suit, the polished speeches about family legacy. Ruth cleaned hospital rooms at midnight and treated people with more dignity than my own blood had shown in daylight. One evening, I asked Ruth why she kept the lunch pail. She turned it in her hands. My husband carried it at the tire plant, she said. After he died, I used paper bags for a while. Helen saw me once, said grief deserves something sturdy. She patched the lining and told me to carry it like a small house. A small house, I repeated. Ruth nodded. She said everybody needs one place where no one can throw away what matters. That line stayed with me, because Marcy had been trying to throw away everything that made me a person. My judgment, my memories, my marriage, my right to choose who sat at my table. And Trent had helped her turn it into paperwork. The emergency guardianship hearing was set for Friday at 9 a.m. They filed first, that was their mistake. By filing, they had to show their evidence. Leona received the packet Thursday afternoon. It included photographs from the restaurant, taken by one of Trent's friends. In them, I was standing over the table, mouth open, while Ruth looked distressed. The caption claimed I was verbally aggressive. It included a statement from Dina Price saying I displayed fixation on a low-income hospital employee. It included the forged power of attorney. It included Dr. Klein's letter. And it included a statement from Marcy. Reading my daughter's words hurt more than any legal document. My father has become increasingly confused since my mother's death. He is vulnerable to manipulation by strangers. He has threatened my husband, neglected home safety, and shown paranoia about family members. I am his only child and seek only to protect his dignity. I had watched her mock Ruth's uniform in public, but the final page was the real danger. A temporary order request that would allow Marcy to place me in protective residential care, pending evaluation. Leona read it, removed her glasses, and said, "They want you out of the house before we can unwind the financial filings." Why? Because the house may be tied to Eli's trust. I frowned. How? Leona pulled Helen's trust documents from her drawer. Helen placed a conditional lien option on the house. If Eli was ever removed from his parents' care due to abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation, the trust could use the house as protected residence with you as guardian or caregiver. I stared at her. Helen. Did what? She built Eli a door, Leona said. Birds need doors too, the drawing the bird in the cage. Helen had not hidden a will. She had hidden an escape plan. The house was not just mine. Not legally transferred, not stolen, but structured so that if Eli needed safety, there was a ready home protected from Marcy and Trent's creditors. And Trent, somehow, had learned enough to panic. Leona continued. If they get you declared unfit first, you cannot serve as trust protector or caregiver. If they control you, they block Eli's door. I felt old then, truly old. Not weak, but heavy with the knowledge that my silence had given them time. What do we do? Leona smiled without warmth. We bring every door they tried to close. Friday morning, the county hearing room was small, beige, and colder than it needed to be. No jury, just a magistrate named Howard Pike, a court reporter, 2 tables, and chairs along the wall. Marcy arrived in a cream coat, looking exhausted in a way designed for sympathy. Trent wore a charcoal suit. Dina sat behind them with a clipboard. Dr. Klein was not there. Eli was not supposed to be there, but I saw him in the hallway with a school social worker named Ms. Alvarez. He had been brought for a separate protection interview after Leona filed an emergency child welfare concern the night before. When he saw me, his eyes filled with relief. Marcy stepped between us. "Don't confuse him," she whispered. I looked at my daughter. He was confused before I arrived. Her face tightened. Inside the hearing room, Marcy's attorney spoke first. A young man with too much confidence and not enough sorrow in his voice. He described me as isolated, grieving, and increasingly erratic. He described Ruth as a suspicious new influence. He described Marcy as a devoted daughter, acting before tragedy occurred. Then Marcy testified. She cried at the right moments. "My father was always strong," she said. "That's what makes this so painful. He doesn't see what's happening to him." The magistrate asked, "What specifically concerns you?" Marcy looked down. He formed an attachment to a woman he met once, a janitorial worker. He became hostile when we questioned it. He believes documents are forged. He has accused my husband without basis. And you believe he is unable to manage his affairs? "Yes," she whispered. Trent testified next. Calm, polished, fake wounded. "I love Walt," he said. "He's family. But he threatened me in public. He's paranoid about normal planning documents he previously signed. We are worried someone has turned him against us." Leona wrote one word on her legal pad and slid it to me, normal. Then Dina Price testified that I showed resistance to care planning, emotional volatility, and possible delusion. Possible. That word is useful when you have no proof but want fear to do the work. Then my side began. Leona stood slowly. At 81, she looked fragile until she opened her mouth. Your Honor, this petition rests on 3 claims. First, that Mr. Bell is cognitively impaired. Second, that he voluntarily granted authority to his daughter. Third, that his concern about fraud is delusional. We will address all 3, and then we will address why this petition was filed this week. Marcy's attorney objected to the tone. Magistrate Pike said, "Proceed carefully, Miss Briggs." Leona did. First, she presented my medical records. No diagnosis, no cognitive decline, no exam by Dr. Klein. Then she presented a letter from Dr. Klein's office stating he had never evaluated me, and that the signature on the letter, submitted by Marcy's attorney, did not match his authorized medical certification format. The magistrate looked up. Trent shifted. Leona asked Trent, "Mr. Holloway, where did you obtain Dr. Klein's letter?" "Our consultant handled documentation." Trent said. Dinah's head snapped up. Leona turned to her. "Mrs. Price?" Dina went pale. "I received it from Mrs. Holloway." Marcy whispered. "Trent gave it to me." There it was, the first fracture in the polished wall. Leona then introduced the power of attorney. She placed my known signatures beside the disputed one. As a former postal inspector, I testified about signature habits, pressure, line hesitation, and the wrong W. Marcy's attorney tried to make me sound obsessive. "So you consider yourself a handwriting expert?" he asked. "No," I said. "I consider myself a man who knows how he's his own name." A few people in the room shifted. Then Leona called June Pelham, the notary, who testified that Trent and Marcy had attempted to notarize a document without me present. She refused. Then Curtis Vale testified. He looked ruined, sweaty, ashamed. He admitted he notarized the power of attorney without witnessing my signature. Trent stared at him like hatred could erase sound. "Why did you do that?" Leona asked. Curtis swallowed. "Mr. Holloway said it was family paperwork, said Walt had signed but couldn't come in. He paid me $500. Cash, yes. Did he mention urgency?" Curtis looked at Trent. "He said the old man had to be handled before he gave the house to a cleaning lady." Ruth sat behind me. I heard her breath catch. The magistrate's face hardened. Marcy began crying, for real now, not grief, fear. But Leona was not finished. She introduced the school scan showing my signature page had been separated from the original pickup form. She introduced metadata from the scanned school document. She introduced the certified recorder copy. She showed that the signature page used in the power of attorney matched the school form scan size and placement. Paper tells stories. When people forget, it has a memory. Then came Helen. Leona asked permission to play a recorded statement. Marcy's attorney objected, arguing hearsay. Leona said it was not being offered for every fact asserted, but to explain preservation of evidence and Helen's state of mind. Magistrate Pike allowed limited playback. Helen's voice filled the hearing room. Steady, thin, alive enough to break me. "If they try to make Walter feel old, remember this. A tree is not weak because it has rings. It is proof it survived weather." Marcy closed her eyes. For 1 second I saw my little girl. Not the woman who filed papers against me. The child who cried when Helen's rosebush died and asked if flowers went to heaven. Then the recording continued. "Trent has debts. He has pressed Marcy to gain access. He knows about Eli's trust when he should not. Protect Eli." Trent stood. "This is outrageous," Magistrate Pike said. "Sit down, Mr. Holloway." He did not. "This is a dead woman's confusion being weaponized by an old lawyer and a janitor." The room went silent. Ruth lowered her eyes. But this time I stood before shame could touch her. "Your Honor," Leona said calmly, "that attitude is precisely why the lunch pail matters." She held up Ruth's silver lunch pail. Marcy looked at it like it had become a snake. Leona explained how Helen had stitched a hidden pocket into the lining. She introduced the memory card, the bank deposit slip, and the drawing. Then she called Miss Alvarez, the school social worker. Ms. Alvarez testified that Eli had repeated concerns consistent with earlier counselor notes. She did not reveal every private word, thank God, but enough. Emotional intimidation, food control, threats involving removal of his grandfather, fear of being sent away. Marcy sobbed. "We never hurt him." Ms. Alvarez looked at her gently but firmly. "Harm is not always a bruise, Mrs. Holloway." That sentence changed the room. Leona then presented the final document, not Helen's will, not my deed. a certified trust instrument establishing Eli's protected education and residence trust, with me named trust protector and emergency caregiver candidate, and Leona as successor trustee. Attached was a sealed statement from Helen explaining why Marcy and Trent were excluded from control. The magistrate read silently. The clock on the wall ticked. Trent's confidence drained like water through cracked glass. Finally, Magistrate Pike looked up. I am denying the emergency guardianship petition for Walter Bell. I am referring the disputed power of attorney and medical letter to the county prosecutor for investigation. I am ordering temporary suspension of any authority claimed under that document. I am also directing Child Protective Services to complete an immediate safety assessment regarding Eli Holloway. Marcy made a sound I had never heard from her before. Trent turned on her. You said she didn't have copies. Marcy looked at him, horrified. The magistrate heard it, so did the court reporter, so did I. Leona leaned toward me and whispered, that will read nicely in the transcript. But justice does not arrive like thunder in real life. It comes in papers, signatures, waiting rooms, and people carrying boxes out of offices. Trent's financial planning license was suspended pending investigation. It turned out he had borrowed against client expectations, misused funds, and planned to access Eli's trust as family management once I was removed. The forged medical letter became a criminal matter. Curtis Vale cooperated. Dina Price tried to vanish from the story, but her emails did not let her. Marcy was not led away in handcuffs that day. Life is not that neat. She faced investigation for fraud and child endangerment. She lost temporary unsupervised custody of Eli while the case was reviewed. She moved into a rental apartment after Trent's debts surfaced and his office closed. For weeks, I did not know what to feel about her. Anger is simple when the villain is a stranger. When it is your child, anger comes braided with memory. I remembered Marcy's first lost tooth, her pink rain boots, the way Helen cried when she left for college. I remembered the little girl before the woman learned to weaponize concern. But remembering who someone was does not excuse what they chose to become. Ellie came to stay with me under temporary kinship placement. The first night, he brought one backpack and the yellow wooden bird from the storage unit. He stood in the doorway of the guest room and asked, "Do I have to earn snacks here?" I had to turn away for a second. "No," I said when I could speak. "Food is not a prize in this house." He nodded like he was trying to believe me. Ruth came by the next day with groceries and a clean patch sewn into the lunch pail lining. She showed Eli how to make grilled cheese without burning the edges. He watched her hands like they were teaching him a language. At dinner he asked, "Are you Grandpa's girlfriend?" Ruth nearly choked on her tea. I said, "She is my friend." Ellie considered that. "Does friend mean she can stay for pie?" Ruth smiled. "I think that's the legal definition." For the first time in months, Eli laughed. Not big, not free yet, but real. Healing is not a door that swings open. It is a hinge learning not to squeak. The house changed slowly. Eli's drawings appeared on the refrigerator. Ruth's soup pot found a regular place in my kitchen. Leona came by once with documents and stayed for peach cobbler. Mara delivered the remaining storage boxes and refused payment, saying Helen had already paid in kindness. One box contained Helen's notebooks, not secrets this time. Recipes, garden plans, lists of birthdays, notes about Eli. Eli likes maps. Eli hates loud voices. Eli feels safe when Walt explains things slowly. Eli needs a yellow room if possible. So I painted the guest room pale yellow. Ellie chose the color. He said it looked like morning. One evening, about 2 months after the hearing, I found him in the sunroom sitting at Helen's sewing table. Ruth had helped him repair the broken wing on the wooden bird. The silver lunch pail sat open beside him, now holding crayons, stamps, and a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in wax paper. "Grandpa," he said, "do birds come back if you leave the door open?" "Sometimes," I said. "If they know it's safe." He nodded. Then he placed the yellow bird on the windowsill, facing the yard. Marcy asked to see me 3 months later. We met in Leona's office. Because I no longer trusted kitchen tables with unsigned paper, she looked smaller. No cream coat, no polished speech, just my daughter with tired eyes and a face that had run out of performance. "I'm divorcing Trent," she said. I did not answer. "He told me everything was for us," she continued. "For Eli, for security. I knew some of it was wrong, but I kept thinking if I stopped, I'd lose everything." "You nearly lost your son," she flinched. "I know." "No," I said quietly. "You are beginning to know." Tears ran down her face. "Dad, do you hate me?" That question hurt because the answer was not clean. I love you, I said, but I do not trust you. She covered her mouth. Both things were true. Love without trust is a house with no stairs. You can see the rooms above you, but you cannot reach them yet. Marcy entered counseling. She accepted supervised visits. At first, Eli refused to go. Then he agreed to 1 hour at a family center with Ms. Alvarez present. He brought the yellow bird and kept it in his lap the whole time. When he came home, I asked if he was all right. He said, "Mom cried, but she didn't make me fix it." That was progress. Not forgiveness progress. Ruth and I kept seeing each other. Slowly, carefully. At our age, you do not rush toward love like young people in movies. You walk beside it and see if it keeps pace. We went back to the Copper Finch once. Not because I liked the place. Because I refused to let humiliation own a room. Ruth wore a blue dress. I wore Helen's anniversary suit again, with the embroidered handkerchief in my pocket. The hostess recognized us and looked nervous. We asked for the same table. Halfway through dinner, Ruth reached down and placed the silver lunch pail on the empty chair beside us. "What's that for?" I asked. She smiled. "For Helen." I looked at that battered pail under the soft restaurant lights and thought about how wrong people can be about worth. Trent saw a cleaning woman and a cheap container. Marcy saw a prop for embarrassment. The room saw a joke. Helen saw a safe place. The truth had been hidden in plain sight, carried by the one person my family thought did not matter. That is how pride loses. It overlooks the humble. It laughs at uniforms. It mocks cracked hands. It forgets that people who clean up messes often see exactly who made them. Near the end of that dinner, Ruth took my hand. "Do you ever regret saying yes to that date?" she asked. I looked at her hand, then at the little scratches around her knuckles, then at the lunch pail, then at the empty chair where Helen's memory sat without jealousy. "No," I said. "I regret only that you had to apologize for honest work." She squeezed my hand outside. Snow began falling lightly, softening the street. A year later, Eli stood in my kitchen packing his school lunch in the silver pail. Ruth had polished it, but not too much. Some scratches should remain. They proved something endured. Inside he placed a sandwich, an apple, a folded napkin, and a small note he had written to himself. I did not read it. He caught me looking and smiled. "It says, 'Birds need doors too,'" he said. My throat tightened. Marcy was doing better by then. Not fixed. People are not machines. But better. She had a small apartment, a steady job at a medical billing office, and supervised visits that slowly became longer. She apologized to Ruth in person one spring afternoon, standing on my porch with trembling hands. Ruth listened, then she said, "Don't apologize to me because you got caught. Apologize to your son every day by becoming safer." Marcy nodded. That was Ruth. Gentle did not mean weak. Trent pleaded guilty to fraud-related charges and lost the career he had used as a costume for greed. I did not celebrate. I slept, but I did not celebrate. Revenge may satisfy the wounded part for a moment, but justice is quieter. Justice is when a child eats without fear. Justice is when an old man keeps his keys. Justice is when a woman in a work uniform sits at the table and no one laughs. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read those places like little porch lights in the dark. I still keep Helen's note in the blue drawer, the one that says, "Protect Eli." The drawer opens easily now. I sanded the edges and oiled the runners. Sometimes I think grief is like that. At first it sticks. You pull and nothing moves. Then one day, with patience, it opens. Not because the pain is gone, but because love has made a little room around it. On Sundays, Eli and I sit in the sunroom. He works on maps. Ruth darns socks, even though I tell her nobody darns socks anymore. The yellow bird sits on the windowsill, facing the yard. In spring, real birds come to the feeder, bold and bright, landing where Helen's tomato seedlings once grew. Sometimes Eli asks about Grandma. I tell him she loved him before he knew he needed protecting. Sometimes he asks if people can change. I tell him they can, but only when they stop calling harm love. And sometimes, when the evening gets quiet and the porch light glows against the dark glass, I think back to that restaurant, a woman in a uniform, a room full of laughter, my daughter's cruel smile, a silver lunch pail hanging from tired fingers. "I'm sorry, I wore my work uniform," Ruth had said, and I had answered, "I still want this date." At the time, I thought I was defending her dignity. I did not know she was carrying the last act of love my wife would ever give me. I did not know my family's lie would break open because they mocked the wrong woman, the wrong uniform, and the wrong little lunch pail. But I know it now. Never measure a person's worth by the clothes they had to work in. Never let family convince you that cruelty is concern. And never believe you are weak just because you stayed quiet for a long time. Sometimes quiet people are not empty. Sometimes they are gathering proof. And sometimes the smallest, humblest thing at the table is the very thing that saves a life.